Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 17th of June 2019 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now, the first article appears on page number 15. The title of the article is This Will Be a Tough Budget to Balance. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3, Economy, under the subsection Indian Economy and Various Issues, as well as the issues related to the government budgeting. Before analyzing this particular article, let us first look into its background. As you all must be aware, the Indian economy is showing the signs of the economic slowdown. In this regard, this particular article here highlights that the upcoming budget to be presented by the finance minister would have to seek a balance between the need to provide the fiscal stimulus in order to revive the economy and the need to maintain the fiscal discipline. This is because in order to revive the Indian economy, as part of the fiscal stimulus package, the government would be required to increase its expenditure, reduce the tax rates and provide more amount of tax exemptions. Overall, the idea here is to increase the money supply in the Indian economy so as to increase the investment and consumption expenditure of the Indian economy. However, in order to follow this fiscal stimulus package, the government would be required to borrow more amount of money. So the fiscal deficit of the government, which essentially represents the total amount of money borrowed by the government in a financial year, this particular fiscal deficit is set to increase. Now, why this particular fiscal stimulus package would create a problem is because the government has committed itself to fiscal consolidation. That is, as part of the fiscal consolidation, the government is required to reduce the fiscal deficit or its total borrowings. Such a roadmap of the fiscal consolidation has been laid on under the Fiscal Responsibility and Budgetary Management Act 2003. Under this particular act, the government is required to reduce the fiscal deficit to 3% of India's GDP in a phased manner. And if you look at the target for the fiscal deficit for this particular financial year, that is for the financial year 2019-20, the government has committed that it would reduce its fiscal deficit to 3.4%. So if you look at the fiscal deficit for the financial year 2018-19, the fiscal deficit was 3.4%. So going forward, the government seeks to maintain the same amount of fiscal deficit. So we can see clearly here that there are two contrasting objectives before the government. On one hand, in order to revive the Indian economy, the government would be required to provide for the fiscal stimulus, which may in turn lead to the increase in the fiscal deficit. However, under the FRBM Act, the government is required to reduce the fiscal deficit, wherein the target for the financial year 2019-20 has been fixed at 3.4%. And that is precisely the reason this particular article highlights that the Union Finance Minister would find it difficult to balance the need for fiscal stimulus with the need to maintain the fiscal discipline. Apart from that, if you look at this particular section of the article, that section which is titled as the fiscally constrained, this particular section highlights a very interesting concept of the off-budget financing of the government. You need to note that this particular concept of off-budget financing was also highlighted by the Comptroller and Auditor General, wherein the CAG has raised various concerns with respect to the off-budget financing of the Indian government. Hence, as part of this video analysis, before understanding the various aspects of the article, we will predominantly focus on understanding the aspects of the off-budget financing, wherein we will understand as to what exactly is the off-budget financing and how the off-budget financing creates problems with respect to government budgeting. Now, the various dimensions of the off-budget financing we would be covering in this particular video analysis include what exactly is the off-budget financing, how the off-budget financing is undertaken by the government, the concerns related to the off-budget financing, and how to address these concerns based upon the recommendations of the CAG. Let us start our discussion with the understanding of the off-budget financing. As you all must be aware, whenever the finance minister presents the union budget, the finance minister is required to present annual financial statement in accordance with Article 112 of the Indian Constitution. Now, this particular annual financial statement is a consolidated list of the receipts and expenditure of the Government of India. So, the off-budget financing here, as the name suggests, it is essentially the financing undertaken by the government. However, such kind of financing is not shown under the annual financial statement presented by the finance minister before the parliament. So, if you look at the definition of the off-budget financing, the off-budget financing refers to the expenditure undertaken by the public sector undertakings by borrowing money from the market. However, when the PSUs borrow the money from the market, they are borrowing this particular money based upon the guarantee of repayment of the loans given by the government. Let us understand this through a simple example. Let's say the Government of India is required to invest in the construction of the railway lines. However, in order to lay down the railway lines, the Government of India would be required to borrow money, leading to the increase in the fiscal deficit. But as stated before, the Government of India is under obligation to reduce the fiscal deficit. Hence, in order to reduce the fiscal deficit, what essentially the Government of India can do here is that it can ask a public sector undertaking, that is the Indian Railway Finance Corporation, to borrow money from the market. So the Indian Railway Finance Corporation would in turn be using this particular borrowed money in order to lay down the railway tracks. So in order to facilitate the Indian Railway Finance Corporation to borrow money from the market, the government would give a guarantee of the repayment. So this particular guarantee would mean that if the Indian Railway Finance Corporation fails to repay back this particular borrowed money, then the obligation would fall on the government to repay back this particular money. So what is happening here is that the government is not directly borrowing money from the market, because of which it will not have any kind of impact on its fiscal deficit. But the government is giving a guarantee on the repayment of loans by the Indian Railway Finance Corporation. So giving of such guarantee by the Government of India on the repayment of loans by the public sector undertakings would invariably lead to the increase in the liabilities of the government. In other words, let's say after 10 years, that is when this particular loan amount gets matured, if the Indian Railway Finance Corporation does not have suitable amount of capability to repay back this particular loan amount, then the entire liability would fall on the Government of India. So as stated before, the off-budget financing is not accounted under the annual financial statement as part of the fiscal deficit of the government. Apart from that, in case of failure by the PSUs to repay back the loan amount, the off-budget financing can essentially become the future liabilities of the government. Now, the Office of CAG has highlighted that the government has resorted to off-budget financing in order to meet the capital expenditure, that is, in order to meet the expenses for the creation of new assets, as well as to meet the revenue expenditure, that is, the expenses to meet its maintenance related expenditure. In case of capital expenditure, in our example, we have discussed as to how the government has resorted to off-budget financing through the Indian Railway Finance Corporation. On similar lines, the government has resorted to the off-budget financing in the power sector as well, wherein the government has been asking the Power Finance Corporation to borrow money from the market based upon the government guarantee. Now, with respect to the off-budget financing in the revenue expenditure, the government has been delaying the payment of subsidies to the Food Corporation of India as well as the fertilizer companies. Now, with respect to the Food Corporation of India, you must be aware that this particular entity has been entrusted with the responsibility of providing the subsidized food grains to the network of the fair price shops in India. So the expenses incurred by the Food Corporation of India can be considered as the subsidies required to be paid by the Government of India. So if the Government of India keeps on paying the subsidies to the Food Corporation of India at the end of every financial year, then the revenue deficit as well as the fiscal deficit of the government would invariably increase. Hence, in order to avoid the increase in the revenue deficit as well as the fiscal deficit, the government goes for the special banking arrangements with the public sector banks. As part of the special banking arrangements, the government facilitates loans from the public sector banks to the Food Corporation of India, wherein the loan amount given to the Food Corporation of India would be equal to the amount of subsidies to be paid by the Government of India. And for all such loans given to the special banking arrangements, the government gives an obligation that it would be repaying back this particular loan amount after certain duration of time. So in this particular case, if the State Bank of India gives loans to the Food Corporation of India, then the government would be repaying this particular amount after a certain duration of time. So when the government is undertaking the off-budget financing for the revenue expenditure, what essentially is happening here is that for that particular financial year, both the revenue deficit and fiscal deficit would not be impacted. However, what is getting impacted is the future liabilities of the Government of India. So based upon our understanding of the off-budget financing, we can raise various concerns with respect to such financing mechanism adopted by Government of India. First and foremost, as stated before, the extent of off-budget financing fails to get captured under the annual financial statement of the Government of India. Because of this particular reason, the off-budget financing does not provide correct picture about the government finances. This can be understood by the fact that when the government resorts to the off-budget financing, it would not be able to provide a correct picture related to the various government deficits such as the fiscal deficit or the revenue deficit. Further, increase in the off-budget financing by the Government of India reduces the parliamentary control over the government finances, and this leads to the erosion in the accountability of the government to the parliament. Further, as stated before, on account of off-budget financing, various deficits of the government such as the revenue deficit or the fiscal deficit may not get impacted. However, the off-budget financing leads to the increase in the debt liability of the Government of India. And as discussed before, in order to undertake the off-budget financing for the revenue expenditure, the government is going for the special banking arrangements. Now, such kind of special banking arrangements are putting unnecessary burden on the public sector banks, leading to the increase in their non-performing assets. And lastly, it can be argued that since the government is giving a guarantee on repayment of loans by the public sector undertakings, the PSUs in India may not exercise due caution with respect to finances which they use, and hence it creates a moral hazard which may in turn require the Government of India to bail out these PSUs in future. Thus, in order to address these concerns related to the off-budget financing, the CAG has given certain recommendations to be adopted by the Government of India, wherein the CAG has highlighted that the government should adopt a comprehensive policy framework dealing with all the aspects related to the off-budget financing, wherein such a comprehensive policy framework should require the government to state as to why it is undertaking the off-budget financing, to what extent the government has resorted to the off-budget financing, the various instruments and the sources used by the Government of India for the off-budget financing, and more importantly, whenever the finance minister is presenting the budget, the finance minister would be required to come out with various strategies as to how the Government of India would fulfill its future liabilities on account of the off-budget financing. Now, by following all these four recommendations, the Parliament of India would be able to better control the finances of the government, leading to the increase in the accountability of the government to the Parliament. Further, since the government would be required to state the extent of financing as well as the reasons for the off-budget financing, this would lead to the increase in the transparency in the government budgeting. So these are some of the important aspects which one should know with respect to the off-budget financing of the Government of India. Apart from that, this particular article here has also given certain recommendations in order to boost the Indian economy. Now, most of these recommendations have been covered in our previous DNS videos. Nevertheless, we will briefly look into these recommendations highlighted in the article. First and foremost, in order to stimulate the private sector investment in the Indian economy, the article has highlighted that the government requires to increase its expenditure. Now, for example, if the Government of India is spending more amount of money in the construction of assets such as roads or railway lines, this would in turn lead to the increase in the demand for the raw materials such as the cement and steel. And such an increase in the demand for the raw materials would in turn stimulate the private sector investment in the Indian economy. Apart from that, the article has also highlighted that the upcoming budget has to provide for sufficient amount of tax exemptions to the private sector entities. And in order to balance the need for fiscal stimulus and the need to maintain the fiscal discipline, RBI should transfer its surplus reserves to the government. Now, in our previous DNS related to the economic capital framework of the RBI, we had discussed that the total amount of reserves of the RBI is equal to 28.92 of its total assets. However, this particular article highlights that the central banks across the world are maintaining only 14% of the total assets in the form of reserves. So accordingly, you can see here the RBI is maintaining a much higher surplus reserves, because of which this particular article has highlighted that the RBI should transfer its surplus reserves to the government. So if the RBI transfer its surplus reserves, the government would be able to provide a fiscal stimulus without adversely affecting its fiscal deficit. And lastly, in order to boost the consumption expenditure in the Indian economy, the article has highlighted that the GST Council should have to reduce the GST rates. The idea here is if the GST rates are reduced, then the people would be encouraged to buy more amount of goods and services, leading to the increase in the consumption expenditure. So these are some of the important recommendations given in this particular article. Further, based upon our video analysis, a mains question for your practice here could be: the off-budget financing has led to reduced parliamentary control over the finances and has also understated the fiscal indicators. In this regard, examine the need for a policy framework to deal with the off-budget financing. Now you can try writing answer to this particular question based upon our video analysis. Thus, having analyzed all the aspects related to this particular article, let us now take up the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 11. The title of the article is Qualifying for the Leader of Opposition. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2 Governance under the subsection Parliament and its Conduct of Business. Apart from that, this article is also important from the perspective of prelims because a rated question on the Leader of Opposition was asked in the prelims 2018. The recently concluded general elections has led to the formation of the 17th Lok Sabha in India. The single largest opposition party, that is the Indian National Congress, has been able to win only 52 seats. Now, in order to get the official status of the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, the Indian National Congress was required to get at least 1/10 of the total seats in the Lok Sabha. That is, it was required to get 55 seats. So this particular failure of the Indian National Congress to get the required number of seats would mean that even this time as well, the Lok Sabha would not be formally recognizing the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha. Now this particular article here highlights that the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha plays a very important role in the democratic process, wherein the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha provide for the constructive criticism of the government policies. Hence, realizing the importance of the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, the article here has highlighted that we need to change the convention for the appointment of the leader of opposition. Hence, as part of this video analysis, we'll understand as to who exactly is the leader of opposition, how is he appointed, what kind of role does he play in the parliament, and the recommendations given in this particular article with respect to changing the convention for the leader of opposition. Let us start analyzing these aspects of the article one by one. The leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha are appointed under the salary and allowances of leaders of the opposition in the Parliament Act 1977. So since they are appointed under a law passed by the Parliament, the leaders of opposition in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha have been given the statutory recognition in India. It is to be noted that under this particular act, the salaries, allowances and other benefits to the leaders of opposition shall be equivalent to that of the cabinet ministers. Now, one of the most important aspects which you need to note with respect to the leaders of opposition is that even though they are appointed under a law made by the Parliament of India, there is no formal mechanism for their recognition. Now, with respect to recognition of the leaders of opposition in Lok Sabha or that of the Rajya Sabha, there is no provision either in the Indian Constitution or for that matter, no provision has been laid down under the rules of procedure of the Lok Sabha. So with respect to the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, it is to be noted that this is a discretionary power of the Speaker, wherein in order to appoint the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, the office of Speaker is required to come out with the directions. In this regard, the office of Speaker of the Lok Sabha has issued Direction 121 Clause C. According to this particular direction, the leader of opposition should belong to an opposition party which has been able to get at least 10% of the seats in the Lok Sabha. In other words, the opposition party has to get at least 55 seats in the Lok Sabha in order to get the official recognition for the leader of opposition. Now you need to note that this particular criteria of 55 seats is applicable only to a single party and it is not applicable to an alliance of the opposition parties. And the reason as to why 10% of the seats has been chosen as a criteria is because the quorum, that is the number of members required for a sitting of the Lok Sabha, has been fixed at 10%. And that is precisely the reason the leader of opposition should belong to a single largest opposition party that has won at least 10% of the seats in the Lok Sabha. Now, if you look at the historical evolution of the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, since the first Lok Sabha, this particular parliamentary convention of appointing the leader of opposition from the single largest party, which holds at least 10% of the seats in the Lok Sabha, has been followed. However, until 1969, there was no formal official recognition for the leader of opposition. It was only in 1969 that the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha was formally and officially recognized. And the first leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha was Ram Subhag Singh. And more importantly, from 9th to 15th Lok Sabha, the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha was officially recognized. This was because the single largest opposition party was able to get the mandated amount of seats. However, if you look at the 16th Lok Sabha, the single largest opposition party, that is the Indian National Congress, was not able to get the 55 number of seats. It was in this particular regard the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha was not duly recognized in the 16th Lok Sabha. On similar lines, if you look at the present Lok Sabha, that is the 17th Lok Sabha, as discussed before, the Indian National Congress has been able to get only 52 seats, which is 3 seats below the mandated amount of seats required to get the leader of opposition status. Now, this particular article here has highlighted the importance of the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, wherein the article has highlighted that the leader of opposition provides for a constructive criticism of the government policies, ensures the government's accountability to the parliament, ensures that adequate amount of debate takes place before the passages of important bills, and lastly, officially recognizing the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha would ensure coordination among the multiple opposition parties. So since the leader of opposition has not been officially recognized in case of India, this particular article has highlighted that we need to replace the criteria or the convention for appointing the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, wherein as stated before, presently the leader of opposition should belong to the single largest opposition party. And since the single largest opposition party has not been able to get the adequate amount of seats in order to get recognition for the leader of opposition, the article has highlighted that the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha could possibly belong to the pre-poll alliance of the parties. Now, for example, let's say there are 3 political parties A, B and C, wherein these political parties have formed a pre-poll alliance to fight the general elections. However, upon the result of the general elections, each of these political parties fails to get the mandated amount of the 55 seats in order to get the recognition for the leader of opposition. However, if we recognize these 3 political parties as a pre-poll alliance, then these political party would be able to appoint the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha. Now, the article has highlighted that the pre-poll alliance of the parties has already got the necessary credibility and legitimacy, wherein if during elections, if no single party secures a clear majority in the House, then the president or in case of state the governor can call the pre-poll alliance of the parties to form the government. So since the pre-poll alliance of the parties has already got the necessary credibility and legitimacy, this article has highlighted that the same has to be extended even for the appointment of the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha as well. Now, such a change in the parliamentary convention for the appointment of the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha has certain benefits. Presently, in case of India, there has been large-scale proliferation in the number of political parties. So, by changing the criteria for the appointment of the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, what we would be able to do here is that we would be able to facilitate the common minimum program among the multiple coalition partners. Now, for example, if these 3 political parties, that is A, B and C, form a pre-poll alliance, then these political parties would be forced to formulate a common minimum agenda which would be acceptable to all these 3 political parties. So when political parties which belong to different political ideologies agree on a common minimum agenda, this would in turn facilitate greater amount of coordination between the political parties and reduce the necessary frictions which may develop among the coalition partners. Apart from that, if a pre-poll alliance of the parties goes on to form a coalition government, since these political parties are bound by a common minimum agenda, this would help strengthen the coalition government. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to leaders of opposition in the Lok Sabha. Further, based upon our video analysis, let us now solve this previous year prelims question. The question here is, consider the following statements. The first statement here is, in the first Lok Sabha, the single largest party in the opposition was the Swatantra Party. Now this statement here is wrong. This is because in the first Lok Sabha, the single largest opposition party was the Communist Party of India. The second statement reads as, in the Lok Sabha, the leader of opposition was recognized for the first time in 1969. As we have discussed, this statement here is correct. The third statement reads as, in the Lok Sabha, if a party does not have minimum of 75 members, its leaders cannot be recognized as the leader of opposition. Now this particular statement here is wrong. This is because in order to get the official recognition for the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, a political party needs to win a minimum of 55 seats. So accordingly, the answer to this particular question is 2 only. Further, based upon our video discussion, a mains question for your practice here could be, considering the important role played by the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, examine the need for the changing the criteria for the recognition of the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha. Now you can try writing answer to this particular question based upon our video analysis. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 8. The title of the article is, In the Absence of Good Law. Now this particular article highlights about the various deficiencies in the public procurement system of India. Hence, accordingly, this article becomes important mainly from the perspective of GS Paper 2, Governance, under the subsection Government Policies and Interventions. Now the various dimensions which we would be covering in this particular article include what exactly is the public procurement policy, various policies adopted by the Government of India in order to encourage the public procurement, and the issues with respect to the public procurement in India. Let us start analyzing these aspects of the article one by one. In a modern welfare state, the government would be required to provide the necessary goods and services to all its citizens. However, due to increase in the population as well as the increase in the complexity of the governance, the government may find it difficult to provide for the goods and services to all its citizens. Hence, in order to reduce its burden, the government goes for the public procurement. Now, the public procurement essentially means the purchase of goods, services or works either by the government or by the public sector undertakings. Now, for example, the public procurement here could mean the purchase of computers by the government for running a government school or awarding a tender to the private sector entity in order to construct the roads. So by going for public procurement, the government would be able to reduce its burden and also provide various goods and services efficiently to the people. Now why this public procurement becomes extremely critical in case of India is that the public procurement by the government of India accounts for almost 30% of its GDP. So the greater amount of public procurement of goods and services by the government of India would lead to creation of jobs as well as the development of the micro, small and medium enterprises. Hence, looking at the importance of the public procurement policies, the government of India has taken a number of steps in order to encourage the public procurement by the government as well as public sector undertakings. For example, the government of India has come out with the public procurement policy for the micro, small and medium enterprise. Now, as part of this particular policy, every central ministry or a department as well as the PSUs owned by the central government are required to procure the goods and services from the micro, small and medium enterprises. And the target which has been fixed for the public procurement is minimum 25%. Now what this means is, out of the total goods and services procured by the central ministries or the PSUs, minimum 25% of such goods and services have to be compulsorily procured from the micro, small and medium enterprises. The second important policy of the government is with respect to promotion of the Make in India. The government of India has formulated the Public Procurement Preference to Make in India Order 2017. As part of this particular policy, the central government is giving higher preference to the domestic companies for the procurement of goods and services. So this particular public procurement from the domestic companies is referred to as the domestic content requirement. And as part of this Make in India order, the government has stipulated that the domestic content requirement should be compulsorily 50%. In other words, every central ministry would be required to purchase at least 50% of their goods from the domestic companies. So the idea here is, if the government purchases more amount of goods and services from the domestic companies, it would be able to give a greater amount of thrust to the Make in India campaign. And in order to facilitate the government procurement, the Government of India has set up the Government e-Marketplace, which is also referred to as GEM. Now the Government e-Marketplace, as the name suggests, is essentially an online portal in order to facilitate the government procurement. Now this particular portal enables all the sellers in India to register themselves on the Government e-Marketplace in order to sell their goods and services to various government entities. Now, as stated before, the public procurement accounts for 30% of India's GDP, and it is extremely crucial for job creation as well as the success of the Make in India. In spite of this, this particular article here has highlighted various issues or concerns with respect to public procurement. Now, the first concern raised in this particular article is that presently there is no comprehensive legislation dealing with all the aspects related to the public procurement. Earlier, the UPA government had introduced the Public Procurement Bill. However, such a bill was not passed by the Parliament. Subsequently, the NDA government had introduced the Public Procurement Bill in the year 2015. Even this particular bill was not passed by the Lok Sabha. So, in the absence of a comprehensive legislation dealing with all the aspects of public procurement, there are multiple rules and regulations related to the public procurement. And such multiplicity in the rules and regulations has led to increased complexities, which has made it difficult for the micro, small and medium enterprises to sell their goods and services to the government entities. Apart from that, the article has also highlighted that in the absence of a comprehensive legislation, there is a probability of the higher chances of corruption with respect to public procurement. The second issue raised in this particular article is with respect to lack of grievance redressal mechanism. Now, this particular article has highlighted that the sellers of various goods and services presently do not have any kind of platform to register their complaints with respect to public procurement. Thirdly, the article has highlighted that this particular absence of the comprehensive legislation at the central government level can also be extended to even the states as well, wherein only 5 states in India have come out with a detailed and comprehensive Public Procurement Act, which means to say the rest of the states have not formulated the comprehensive legislation related to all the aspects of the public procurement. And lastly, in the absence of a grievance redressal mechanism, most of the sellers of the goods and services have approached the courts in India, and this has in turn led to the frequent litigations. And such frequent litigations before the courts have led to the delay in the procurement of the goods and services under the public procurement. Now, these are some of the important aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. Apart from that, based upon a video analysis, a mains question for your practice here could be: the public procurement policy of the government has the potential to ensure the success of Make in India and create more jobs. In the light of this particular statement, examine various issues with respect to the public procurement. Now you can try writing answer to this particular question based upon a video analysis. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 9. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Social Sector Initiatives. Now this particular article here raises certain concerns related to the supply of the substandard quality of drugs through the network of the Jan Aushadhi Kendras. Hence, as part of this video analysis, we'll understand the concept of the generic medicines as well as the government initiative known as the Pradhan Mantri Bharatiya Jan Aushadhi Pariyojana. Let us first understand certain basic details related to the generic medicines. Now, the generic medicines are essentially those medicines which have the same chemical composition as the branded drugs. Usually, the generic medicines are considered to be those medicines which are manufactured after the expiry of the patents. As you all must be aware, under the trade related aspects of the intellectual property rights as well as the Indian Patents Act, the duration of a patent on a medicine is applicable for a period of 20 years, which means to say until the completion of 20 years, no other manufacturer can manufacture the same medicine except the patent holder. However, upon the expiry of this particular duration of 20 years, other manufacturers would also be allowed to manufacture the same drug. So, the generic medicines are those medicines which are manufactured after the expiry of the 20 years of the patent duration. Now, one of the most important aspect related to generic medicines is that since the pharmaceutical companies do not spend any money on the research and development on the generic medicines, the generic medicines are considered to be much cheaper as compared to the patented drugs. Now, in spite of the lower prices of the generic medicines, people are not aware of these medicines because the generic medicines are sold under the chemical composition name. Now, for example, in case of painkillers, both crocin as well as calpol can be considered as branded drugs. However, if you look at the chemical composition of crocin and calpol, the chemical composition is essentially the paracetamol. So, if paracetamol is sold separately as a tablet or a drug, then this particular paracetamol drug can be considered as a generic medicine. Similarly, in case of antibiotics, the azithromycin can be considered as the generic version of azithral branded drug. So, as stated before, since the generic medicines are considered to be much cheaper as compared to the branded drugs, the government of India has launched the Pradhan Mantri Bharatiya Jan Aushadhi Pariyojana in order to provide the generic medicines to the people at affordable prices. So, the main objective of this particular program is to reduce the out of pocket expenditure of the Indian citizens on health and to provide them the quality medicines at a lesser prices. Wherein, under this particular program, the government seeks to provide the generic medicines through the network of the Jan Aushadhi medical stores. It is to be noted that the Jan Aushadhi medical stores can be opened by individuals as well as the non-governmental organizations. And all such individuals as well as NGOs are given financial incentives by the government for opening of such medical stores. Now, with respect to the implementation agency of this particular program, this program is implemented by the Bureau of Pharma PSUs of India, which works under the Department of the Pharmaceuticals. So, these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now, the next article appears on page number 9 as a data point. Now, this particular article talks about a global index known as the Global Peace Index. Hence, this article becomes important from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Current Events of National and International Importance. As you all must be aware, in previous year UPSC prelims, questions have been asked with respect to the important international indices. So, looking at the nature of questions, one should know the publishing agency, the important parameters used to calculate the index, as well as the India's ranking or performance on that particular index. Hence, as part of this video analysis, let us focus on these three aspects related to the Global Peace Index. The Global Peace Index is basically a report which ranks the countries across the world depending upon the levels of peacefulness or the absence of the conflict. This particular index is published by an agency known as the Institute for Economics and Peace. The indicators used by this particular report include the extent of conflict, the safety and security of the citizens, and the level of militarization in a country. Now, the latest report is the 13th global edition of the Global Peace Index. And according to this latest report, there has been overall increase in the global peace as compared to the previous year 2018, wherein the report has highlighted that the European continent is the most peaceful region of the world. However, West Asia and North Africa are among the least peaceful region of the world, and West Asia and North Africa are in turn followed by South Asia. And if you look at the peace index according to the various countries, Iceland remains the most peaceful country in the world. And when it comes to the least peaceful country for the year 2018, it was Syria. But in the year 2019, Syria has been replaced by Afghanistan. And if you look at the performance of India on the Global Peace Index, India has reduced its position by 5 ranks as compared to the year 2018, wherein in the year 2019 it presently stands at 141. And the main reason for the deterioration in India's ranking and score has been attributed to internal conflicts within India, the growing tensions between India and Pakistan, as well as the border tensions between India and China. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. Now the next article appears on page number 20. Now this particular article here highlights about the success of the conservation efforts related to the rare black softshell turtles. Hence this particular article becomes important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection General Issues on Environmental Ecology. Now this particular article here highlights that the Ugratara temple located in Guwahati in the state of Assam has recently organized the special darshan of the black softshell turtles. It is to be noted that the conservation efforts of these turtles were led by an NGO by the name Good Earth. Now this particular NGO collected the eggs of these turtles from various temple ponds located in the state of Assam. After collecting the eggs of these turtles, these eggs were first incubated at the Assam State Zoo. And upon the hatching of these eggs, the black softshell turtles are said to be introduced into the wild by the temple. In this regard, let us understand certain basic details related to the black softshell turtles. Now, the black softshell turtles are mainly found in the temple ponds in India, particularly in state of Assam as well as Bangladesh. And since these turtles are found mainly in the temple ponds and not in the wild, the IUCN has categorized them under the extinct in the wild category. Apart from that, the Wildlife Protection Act in India has placed these turtles under Schedule 1 of the Act. And lastly, these turtles also hold the cultural significance because these turtles are considered as the avatar of Lord Vishnu by the local population in the state of Assam. So these are some of the important aspects related to the black softshell turtles. Now based upon our video analysis, these 4 questions shall be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find answers to these 4 questions. We shall be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. Now the first question here is, which among the following are the likely implications of the off-budget financing of the government? The first option here is increase in the fiscal deficit. As we have discussed, by undertaking the off-budget financing, the fiscal deficit of the government remains unaffected. Hence, this particular option here is wrong. The second option reads as increase in the future liabilities of the government, which as we have discussed is correct. The third option reads as decrease in the parliament's control over the government's finances. Even this particular option here is correct. So looking at the options which are given here, the correct answer to this particular question is C, that is 2 and 3 only. Now coming to the second question, the question here is, consider the following statements related to the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha. The first statement here is, he or she must belong to a political party or an alliance of parties which wins at least 10% of the seats in the Lok Sabha. Now this particular option here is wrong. This is because the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha must compulsorily belong to a single opposition party and he cannot belong to an alliance of parties. The second option reads as the appointment and recognition of the leader of opposition has been provided under the salary and allowances of the leaders of opposition in the Parliament 1977. Now as we have discussed, only the appointment of the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha has been provided under this particular act. When it comes to the recognition of the leader of opposition in the Lok Sabha, this is a discretionary power of the Speaker of Lok Sabha, wherein the Speaker of the Lok Sabha has provided for the direction 121 clause C. Hence this particular option here is wrong. So the correct answer to this particular question is D, that is neither 1 nor 2. Now coming to the third question, the question here is, consider the following statements related to the generic medicines in India. The first statement here is the generic medicines or the non-patented drugs which are sold under the chemical composition name. This statement here is correct. The second statement reads as the Pradhan Mantri Bharatiya Jan Aushadhi Pariyojana is implemented by the National Pharmaceutical Pricing Authority. Now this option here is wrong. This is because this program is implemented by the Bureau of Pharma PSUs of India. So accordingly, the correct answer to this particular question is A, that is one only. Now coming to the last question, the question here is consider the following statements related to the public procurement in India. The first statement here is the public procurement policy provides for procurement of minimum 25% of the goods and services from the micro, small and medium enterprises. As we have discussed, this statement here is correct. The second statement reads as the public procurement policy provides for the domestic content requirement to boost the Make in India. As we have discussed, under the Make in India order, the central government PSUs as well as the central government ministry are required to compulsorily buy at least 50% of the goods from the companies located in India. Hence, even this particular option here is correct. So, if you look at the options which are given here, the correct answer to this particular question is C, that is both 1 and 2. With this, we have come to end of today's discussion. Now, let us have a look at the question for the day.